Welcome back, world history students. Today, we're going to review the things that we've learned about Buddhism last week and add a few more ideas to kind of round out the concept. And then we will practice comparing and contrasting the information that we know between Hinduism and Buddhism. So last week we talked about Buddhism, and one of the things that I stopped and gave you a little side lesson on were mudras. And so I'm challenging you right now to take a look at this statue, be reminded of some of the Buddhist principles that we talked about, and check out the mudra. So the hand position is lying in the lap, and the eyes are closed. This is meditation mudra. I wonder if you remember what this one means. This is the teaching mudra. The hand faced forward, the palm out, is strength, resolve. And then this is the mudra that we started with, which was enlightenment, moment of enlightenment. And this is an image you've seen a couple of times. Okay, quick review of what we talked about last week. We talked about Siddhartha Gautama's mother and father being excited about her getting pregnant because it meant a possible heir to their kingdom's throne. But while she was pregnant, she kept seeing a white elephant in her dreams, and she went to a Brahmin priest to ask what it meant, and they said that the baby was destined to be a great political leader or a great spiritual leader. And of course, they were excited about that, hoping that it meant a great political leader that would follow in the footsteps of his father. And so he was raised in isolation, given the best of the best, and taught how to be the best leader that he could possibly be, married a beautiful princess, and began a family within the kingdom. So Siddhartha is now around 18 years old, but he's seeking information from the outside world. And so we told the story of him asking a charioteer to take him out and about, and where he experienced things outside of the palace walls that he hadn't experienced inside, which was a lot of suffering in the ways of people getting older and suffering from disease and then eventually death, and how he decided that he was going to seek enlightenment as he saw others doing to try to avoid that suffering. And so he went back home, renounced his political power and his old life by cutting off his hair, and then seeking out enlightenment. Okay. He sought it through meditation, 40 days and 40 nights, where he finally came to some conclusions, came to peace, and became the Buddha. We talked about the idea of Buddhism being a religion or philosophy, depending upon whose interpretation that you accept, but that they venerate, they do not worship. So it's a veneration of Buddha, which means an honoring and a respecting of the example, but not a worshiping as a god. A couple of new pictures for you, just to show you that in contemporary times, not very far from your own homes, are Buddhist temples where the gatherings are taking place on the regular. This is a Buddhist temple in, I think we were in like just south of Seattle area. This is specifically like a Cambodian Buddhist temple. And this here on the right-hand side is the eldest monk that is here at this particular monastery. And so he gets the seat of honor, which is nearest the Buddha. Down this way, which I think you'll see in just a minute in the next image, are a series of monks, but it goes from the oldest to the youngest, and the youngest sits furthest away from the Buddha. In this particular ceremony, there was an entire community out and about, and they were bringing food, And it's just a good example of like the Buddhist community that exists today. This is an example of in that same monastery how people venerate. So remember, I told you that lots of incense used, food sometimes, flowers and things like that. So you can see how the offerings that would sit in front of the Buddha, and that he's in the enlightenment pose here. You can see him back here in the Bodhi tree. I already showed you this picture that represented the Sangha community, and the Jataka is written in Pli, and then we'd ended with the Dalai Lama. Okay, your new information for today. Just one screen today, we're going to talk about how Buddhism spreads and what some of how the beliefs are taught, and just some of the other basics of Buddhism. Okay, so one thing I wanted to kind of clarify, because in the last lesson I was saying that one of the primary goals in Buddhism is to achieve nirvana, which is enlightenment, to escape reincarnation. All of that is true. But and they do that by understanding that you have the power to achieve all of this on your own. All of that is true. But I think that I drew kind of more of a contrast between this Atman and Brahman idea. Actually in Buddhism, they don't call it Atman and Brahman, but they do believe that your soul here is connected to a more universal soul. They call it Brahman, the universal soul. And that really this is kind of a deep explanation, but they really believe that our world, like the reality that we feel like we see around us, is really kind of a false reality, and that we're connected with things that don't really matter here. And as a result, when we leave this world of really kind of illusions behind, then we start to understand that our connection between ourselves and this universal Brahman is really where the answers lie. So I think I made that oversimplified before. I don't know if that made sense, but religions and philosophies like this are deep, deep, and it's hard to explain in a day. Okay, so the Buddhist community, the religious community, is one of the really important pieces of the Buddhist puzzle. In just a second, I'm going to talk about the three jewels, and one of the jewels of Buddhism, one of the most important aspects, is the religious community called the Sangha. I showed you pictures before and I spelled it for you, but I didn't write it out in your notes. So in some cases around the world, there have been times when 50% of the male population went into being ordained as a Buddhist monk. So in some geographic regions where Buddhism's particularly strong, like Tibet, for example, as much as half. And in some Southeast Asian countries today, it is the practice to, like when boys are on break from school, it's very typical for them to go and be ordained in like a short-lived kind of like credit retrieval here. They take a break from school, and there's kind of a mini session that goes on where a lot of guys will go off and become ordained. And it's just like a temporary ordination to try to kind of gain honor for the family and understand Buddhist teachings. So religious community is taken quite seriously elsewhere, and a lot of people take part in developing their understanding of Buddhism. Some people devote their entire lives to being monks and nuns, and that's a good indicator to you that you can be both in the Buddhist practice. There can be girls and boys that become Buddhist monks and nuns. And also in a lot of practices, actually, the monks can also marry. In some practices, they can marry, and some they cannot. The idea of being a monk and a nun, though, it's that you live a very austere. Austere means a very simple, very basic life, and that you would model the Buddhist practices, teach Buddhist teachings, but I think as important as anything else, be an example in this world that people can choose to follow. So the three bases of Buddhism are Buddha, of course, the religious community, the Sangha, and the teachings, the dharmas. And these three bases are called the three jewels of Buddhism. So Buddha, the religious community or Sangha, and the teachings, the Dharma. So those are the three jewels of Buddhism. Buddha, of course, as the kind of the central figure that helps to give both example and teachings to the community. The community, the Sangha, is extremely important. Here you see a picture of, so in that last picture I was showing you, the oldest monk was up here next to the Buddha, and then all of these guys are oldest to youngest. And the one that was friendliest to us as we were there to kind of understand and take part in the ceremony, the one that was closest to us, the youngest one, was the best communicator with kind of an outside force. Anyway, in this ceremony, it was kind of interesting because all the people brought all of these dishes of food to share with the monks, and none of the people in the community. So all of this is like one massive big potluck. But you can't try any food yourself until the monks have tried a little bite of everything. So you can see all these dishes out in front of them, and they were busy trying to try a bite of everything that was offered to them, and then, only then, could the rest of us eat. Buddhism and society. So Buddhism, as you can imagine, was really popular amongst the poor, the lower caste. People like the untouchables and the Shudras were really intrigued by Buddhism, in part because Buddhism rejected that caste system, and they seemed the most removed from having power in that old structure. Right? So the poor, lower caste, least educated, I think, found Buddhism the most approachable, in part because you could get to nirvana in this lifetime if you did everything right. So it really empowered all people. Monks and nuns spread the teachings of Buddha, but they do not proselytize. I think I mentioned this last week, but proselytizing is when a religion sends people door to door to kind of recruit and to encourage the message that a particular church has to offer. Monks and nuns in the Buddhist practice do not do that. They're out and about and available in some cases for people to approach, but they do not approach proselytizing. There are a number of religions that don't do that. Judaism also does not proselytize. As time goes on, there is more than just the Jatakas that are used as sacred literature to teach the teachings of the Buddha. So one of them is the Wheel of Dharma. In some cases, it's called the Wheel of Dhamma. But Wheel of Dharma, I'm going to use that term because it's kind of the more widely accepted around us, and Dharma, I think, is a word that you can grasp onto. The Wheel of Dharma is the idea of the eightfold path. I don't remember if I hope you'll remember looking at that last week, but it was things like right view, right action, right speech. Those encompass the teachings and become part of sacred literature. It's an explanation of what all of those mean. Right meditation, right mindfulness. Hopefully you remember that list from last week. Okay, so there's the meaning of the Dharma, the Wheel of Dharma, an explanation of, how do you follow the Eightfold Path. And then the Kalama Sutta is a piece where, so supposedly people are at this point hearing all of this new information, and they're confused. They're like, we don't know who to follow. Let's say that you're in India and Buddhism is just spreading about. You have all of these different people teaching different things, and they don't understand exactly what is the truth. The Kalama Sutta is supposedly people going to the Buddha and saying, we're confused, please clarify. And then he clarifies. And that becomes the Kalama Sutta. So it's an explanation of what Buddha says that you need to do. And in general, some of the things that he says is just that you can't accept, blindly the things that are put in front of you. You have to question, and you have to ask and do the work for yourself. He says that, just accepting what's always been is not necessarily the path forward. So here's part of the Kalama Sutta. Believe nothing, no matter where you read it or who said it, unless it agrees with your own reason, your own common sense. So you must do the work for yourself. So these are all part of the new sacred literature of Buddhist teachings. Okay? Buddhism spreads throughout Southeast Asia, all the way into China and Japan, into Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, places like that, into Vietnam, and is well and live in your own community today. Although the Buddhist communities, you'll find them most prominently to the north in places where the population is a little bit more diverse than here. So here's the monk that was doing the most teaching to the group that I was part of, helping us understand this better. And look at all this great food in front of him. My goodness, it was so interesting to sit and eat with this community. And just so you can see that in contemporary times that there are a number of places where people go to Buddhist temples or Buddhist monasteries all over your local area, just further north. There's a beautiful Buddhist temple in the Yelm area. Okay, we're going to stop right there. And then we are going to do a competition, 20 questions, the differences between Hinduism and Buddhism. So if you will spend the next couple of moments like looking over your notes and kind of comparing in your mind what were some of the similarities and the differences between the two, you'll be prepped for what we do next. Thank you.